trapped in their own reflections, the harrowing stories of individuals who feared mirrors. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when I first came across a stack of yellowed notebooks in a small-town antique shop, tucked away behind mismatched candlesticks and dusty porcelain figurines. The shopkeeper had no clue of their contents, only that they were retrieved from an abandoned home known for strange rumors. Intrigued, I convinced him to let me flip through them. Within moments, I realized they held a series of personal accounts, diaries, and transcribed letters, all revolving around a singular, unsettling theme: an intense fear of mirrors. Far from mere phobias, these writings detailed experiences that blurred the line between psychological torment and the supernatural, describing illusions in reflective surfaces, glimpses of malevolent shapes behind the glass, and an overarching conviction that something alive lurked within those polished depths. I soon discovered that these experiences bore the name catoptrophobia, a fear of mirrors, but the phenomenon described was far more extreme than a simple aversion. These individuals felt haunted by their own reflections, or believed that reflections served as gateways for horrors beyond normal comprehension. Some described extended nightmares about doppelgangers. Others recounted poltergeist-like events triggered only when mirrors were present, and still others insisted the reflections physically harmed them in subtle ways. As I delved deeper, I found a tapestry of stories that spanned generations and continents, all woven together by an unsettling question: what if the face we see in the mirror is not just our own? The earliest pieces in this hodgepodge collection of testimony came from the late 19th century, though references to earlier events popped up in footnotes. The older documents told of a young woman named Sophia living in a rural English manor at the turn of the century. One battered diary described how Sophia's fear of mirrors began innocently. While recovering from a fever, she lay in her bedroom, the large vanity mirror turned so she could track her convalescence. On the first night of her fever's remission, she woke close to midnight and saw, in the reflection, the door behind her opening. Expecting the nurse or a relative, she tried to turn, but realized no one stood in the actual room. Yet in the mirror, the door swung wide, a dark silhouette slipping in. Terrified, she jerked around physically, only to see that the door was indeed closed. When she looked back at the mirror, the silhouette vanished. Over the following nights, this scenario repeated, with the silhouette sometimes looming closer behind her reflection. She began sleeping with the mirror covered, but each morning found the covering askew. The vanity turned slightly so that from her bed, if she cracked an eye open, she would see that door in the reflection once more. Her letters to a friend detailed how her entire sense of safety collapsed, suspecting a presence in the house that used the mirror as a vantage point or corridor. Eventually, she had the vanity removed from her room, throwing it into storage. The phenomenon ceased, and she recovered physically. But psychologically, the damage was done. Sophia avoided reflective surfaces for the rest of her life, leaving notes that she dared not see who might be behind me in the reflection. The watchers in that era labeled it a ghost story or a fever-induced delusion. But Sophia's conviction never wavered. Next, an undated but apparently early 20th century letter recounted a woman in Munich named Hilda. She insisted that from the time she was a child, every reflection of herself in glass or polished metal displayed a slightly different expression on her face, like a minute delay that let her reflection's eyes flicker with a strange glint. No one else saw it. She tested it by blinking, carefully timing her movements, searching for a mismatch. Rarely, but undeniably at random intervals, she caught the reflection blinking too slowly or smirking with parted lips while she herself frowned. This progressed into a full-blown terror whenever she passed store windows or restaurant mirrors. She wrote about an incident at age 15 when, leaning into the bathroom mirror, she glimpsed an expression that was not her own. the reflection's eyes wide with an unholy hunger, its lips parted in a silent, desperate hiss. Hilda reeled back, smashing her elbow. She wrote that the reflection's face lingered an extra second before aligning back to normal. After that, she took to wearing hats with wide brims that concealed her face, so she could go about her errands without inadvertently seeing her reflection. Over time, her social life collapsed. People found her anxious manner and refusal to meet her own eyes suspicious or unnerving. Her letter ended with a note that she was seeking a specialist who believed in mirror illusions, but that none took her claims seriously. She worried that if the illusions worsened, the reflection might eventually deviate for so long that it walked away from her entirely, leaving her behind as some empty shell. The watchers reading her letter might see a textbook case of psychosis, or perhaps a mild phenomenon of ocular illusions. Yet Hilda insisted in every line that she was rational, except for this unshakable experience of seeing an independent reflection. By mid-century, the diaries introduced more direct references to catoptrophobia, describing group therapy sessions or clinical notes from psychiatrists. One therapist, named Dr. Leon, specialized in phobic illusions. His notes offered a window into how these patients often shared a common thread of hypervigilance. Some had childhood traumas, others had endured extreme stress. Yet the illusions always revolved around a sense that the reflection was inhabited by another presence, sometimes recognized as themselves but twisted, other times appearing as a separate being entirely. Dr. Leon documented an especially severe case of a man named Pietro who believed that each mirror contained a living creature waiting to steal his identity. He plastered the mirrors in his home with newspapers, but the presence continued to torment him. The caretaker found him one morning in a frenzy, screaming that they had emerged from the mirror at 3 a.m., leaving a wet footprint on the tile floor. The caretaker saw no footprint, but she found the tile floor suspiciously damp in a single spot. Dr. Leon's sessions indicated the man was neither hallucinating in the classical sense nor seeking attention. He seemed genuinely convinced of infiltration from the other side of reflection. The watchers reading these notes see them as either a testament to the destructive power of mania or hints at a deeper phenomenon that mainstream psychology can't decode. Shifting to more modern times, some internet-based communities revolve around mirror phobias, where members share chilling, personal experiences. They post pictures of mirrors that they claim yield strange anomalies, extra shadows, shapes behind them, or subtle distortions in the reflection's mouth or eyes. Critics dismiss them as photographic artifacts, reflection warps, or straightforward pranks. But the watchers note how consistent these anomalies can be, cropping up in random angles or times. One poster recounted a bizarre situation. Every time I pass by my hallway mirror at night, I see a flicker, as if something ducks out of sight. Once, I turned quickly and swore I glimpsed a pale hand retracting behind the mirror's left edge. Another described how his reflection once whispered his name. The watchers call this phenomenon whispering glass, an alleged event where a faint murmur emerges from behind or within the mirror, audible but not reproducible on recordings. The watchers link it to poltergeist activity, though all mainstream investigators find no conclusive evidence. In certain occult traditions, a known practice called scrying or specular magic uses black mirrors to peer into other realms or glean hidden knowledge. Some catoptrophobes, ironically, have described unwittingly performing a form of scrying by obsessively staring into a standard mirror at night, lit by candlelight. The watchers note that under such conditions, illusions can become intense, especially if the person is in a lightly entranced state. The historical figures like Nostradamus apparently used scrying with reflective bowls. Could modern catoptrophobes be experiencing a pathological form of involuntary scrying, glimpsing fleeting energies or illusions? Some watchers find it plausible that the same phenomenon that scryers harness can manifest spontaneously in individuals with heightened sensitivity. The watchers highlight a sub-ritual in some traditions called the midnight gaze, where a candlelit observer sees morphing faces in the mirror. This effect, recognized in psychology as the Caputo effect, can breed genuine terror if unprepared. So perhaps this universal phenomenon of illusions might partly explain the catoptrophobia letters. Yet the watchers claim the letters go beyond illusions, describing real external phenomenon, physical changes in the reflection, or sabotage to the environment, like the caretaker noticing wet footprints. They remain convinced something more is at play. One story stands out for its raw detail. A teenage girl named Alexis, living in a small coastal town, who began documenting her experiences in a notebook when she realized no one believed her otherwise. She wrote of how every morning, as she prepared for school, her reflection in the bathroom mirror lagged a fraction of a second behind her movements. If she tilted her head left, the reflection took an extra heartbeat to follow. She set up a phone camera to try capturing it. Each time, the phone footage looked normal, but to her eyes, in real time, the lag was unmistakable. Over weeks, the reflection's lag grew longer, until one day it seemed that the reflection stared at her, unblinking, for a full second after she had turned away. She fled the bathroom. In the next days, she tried to avoid that mirror, using only a small hand mirror. But the phenomenon recurred in the hand mirror too. Fearful, she told her mother, who assumed teenage stress or a cry for attention. One night, Alexis snapped, smashing every mirror in the house, howling that they were stealing my soul. She ended up in therapy, forcibly. The watchers discovered her notebook years later, which ended with a chilling line: "It's not me in there. It's something else, and it wants me to stay longer each time." That final reference to staying longer might suggest that illusions grew stronger with repeated exposure, as though each stare gave the reflection more hold. The watchers see an echo of older legends about mirror devils or evil twins that claim an unwary gazer's life force. Beyond personal tragedies, some watchers connect catoptrophobia to mass cultural phenomena. Certain modern haunted house attractions exploit illusions with mirrors. Maze-like attractions or funhouse mirrors evoke confusion, sometimes with strobe lights, to stoke panic. Catoptrophobes find such places intolerable. But for the watchers, these amusements are a trivialization of a deeper primal fear. They note how the swirling illusions in a funhouse can replicate the existential confusion catoptrophobes face daily. Meanwhile, in horror cinema, the mirror scare is a staple. A character closes a mirrored medicine cabinet, revealing something behind them. The watchers note that real catoptrophobes find such scenes excruciating, not entertaining. They argue that pop culture ironically normalizes the fear, defanging it for entertainment, while the real sufferers are left grappling with a far more persistent dread. The watchers see a comedic ignorance in mainstream audiences who get a cheap thrill from mirror jump scares, not realizing how psychologically scarring such illusions are for genuine catoptrophobes. In the diaries I read, one recurring question is whether these illusions might represent an underlying mental condition. Certainly, some psychiatrists see it as a specialized form of anxiety or delusion, especially when illusions become so vivid. Indeed, illusions can be unstoppable when fueled by fear. But many letter writers insisted they had no hallucinations outside of mirror contexts. They functioned in daily life, stable in all respects, until confronted by a reflective surface. The watchers interpret that as evidence of a phenomenon specifically tied to the portal or barrier concept of a mirror. This concept, found worldwide, holds that mirrors are gates to the spirit realm or parallel dimensions. Some tribes, for instance, cover mirrors or break them in times of mourning to prevent the dead from returning or capturing the soul of the living. Could catoptrophobes be more sensitive to that dimension, involuntarily seeing glimpses that most remain blind to? Modern technology has introduced new forms of reflective surfaces, smartphone screens, tinted windows, the black mirror of a turned-off TV. Some watchers note that catoptrophobes often also fear these modern surfaces, because even a phone screen in standby can reflect a faint image, leading to the same illusions or dreaded sense that an entity might show itself. The watchers see it as an unstoppable expansion of reflective surfaces in the digital age, making it harder for catoptrophobes to avoid triggers. Meanwhile, the watchers see potential for new phenomena, digital mirrors that augment your reflection with filters. Might that open fresh illusions or vulnerabilities if a glitch shows something else? The watchers are enthralled by the notion that advanced R mirrors found in some futuristic clothing stores or gaming setups could produce illusions so potent that catoptrophobes can't handle them. We may see an uptick in catoptrophobia as technology merges with reflection illusions. In the end, trapped in their own reflections, the harrowing stories of individuals who feared mirrors stands as a testament to how a seemingly mundane object, ubiquitous in daily life, can become a site of existential horror for certain minds. The watchers glean from these diaries that illusions in the reflection might be unstoppable once they take root. A single childhood incident can sow seeds of suspicion, and each reflection thereafter can water those seeds, blossoming into a fully formed terror. The stories range from mild cautionary fear to full-blown meltdown. While some overcame it through therapy or spiritual rites, many more found themselves living reclusive lives, removing or covering mirrors, wearing tinted glasses, or avoiding public places. The watchers note that this social isolation can be devastating and that mental health professionals often struggle to convey empathy for such an unusual phobia, dismissing it or offering only rational platitudes. The result is that many sufferers remain unheard or disbelieved. For the watchers who read these diaries or letters in the old psychologist's files, the final impression is one of layered tragedy. Yes, illusions might be illusions. Yet illusions can kill hope, strangle relationships, undermine any sense of stability. Some watchers even wonder if behind illusions lie hidden spiritual truths, that a fraction of catoptrophobes truly glimpsed something in the reflection. The watchers remain open to that possibility, remembering the caretaker in earlier centuries who claimed to see a shadow behind his own reflection at dusk, a shadow that lingered a heartbeat too long. The caretaker died soon after in uncertain circumstances, fueling the rumor that the reflection claimed him. For mainstream logic, it's superstition or mania. For catoptrophobes, it's the ultimate fear realized. Reading these accounts, I found myself double-checking my own reflection more than once at night, half expecting a flicker of misalignment or a shape behind me. That creeping paranoia is the same that catoptrophobes endure daily. The watchers would say that as soon as you let the possibility of reflection illusions in, it's nearly impossible to unsee them. The mind begins scanning for anomalies, and any flicker or shadow becomes cause for alarm. One letter ended poignantly with the phrase, "Mirrors used to show me who I was. Now they only show me who I fear I might be." That encapsulates the heartbreak. Catoptrophobia can warp identity, turning the basic act of self-recognition into a daily confrontation with one's darkest shadow. And so, for a small but significant group, illusions overshadow illusions, forging a labyrinth in which reflection upon reflection can drown a person in quiet horror. And yet, we continue to embed mirrors everywhere, on cars, in bathrooms, in phone screens, in architecture. Perhaps we cannot do otherwise. The watchers might see a comedic irony. Our society, fixated on vanity and self-image, saturates our environment with reflective surfaces, ironically making it a near inescapable labyrinth for those who fear them. The watchers who champion the catoptrophobes call for more empathy and maybe alternative living solutions where reflective surfaces are minimized. Meanwhile, the catoptrophobes themselves live an invisible struggle, overshadowed by more typical mental health issues that overshadow the public eye. But for them, each day is a fresh hazard, each glance a potential trigger for illusions unstoppable once glimpsed. The watchers glean from the diaries that many catoptrophobes retain hope of a cure or a final resolution, some magical mirror shattering, or a spiritual revelation that sets them free. A few diaries mention fleeting victories. A man named Cass overcame his fear after a near-death experience, returning to the mirror with new perspective, seeing only the vessel of his soul and finding the illusions fled. Perhaps the illusions were tethered to his personal regrets, and once those regrets lifted, so did the illusions. That might stand as a slender hope for others. Ultimately, these stories converge to highlight the unstoppable synergy between illusions and the mind's capacity for horror. The watchers see that synergy in the darkest illusions of haunting reflections or doorways to the other side. The catoptrophobes see it in daily life, each reflection a minefield of potential meltdown. The diaries and letters swirl with phrases like, "I cannot look again," or "It might take me," or "The reflection's smile was not my own." The watchers read them with a mixture of empathy and dread. For illusions, once they take hold, might become unstoppable. The watchers, finishing these diaries, remain haunted by the knowledge that behind every reflective surface, something might lurk, be it the monstrous side of our psyche or a literal entity. And so, the question remains, do we call it illusions, overshadowing illusions, or a dreaded phenomenon bridging the intangible boundary between the physical realm and something else? Perhaps the final lesson is that while illusions can devastate those who see them, illusions can also vanish if we confront them. Some catoptrophobes overcame their dread by facing the mirror in structured therapy, dissolving illusions with logic and repeated exposure. Others combine spiritual rituals as if banishing an actual presence. The watchers remain uncertain which method holds ultimate truth. But the diaries prove that for each unexplainable story, a flicker of possibility emerges that maybe illusions are not illusions at all. The watchers leave that choice to the reader, impressed by the sincerity and heartbreak in each letter. As for me, finishing that last page, I felt the hush of the dusty shop around me. Looking up, I saw the antique shop's tall mirror in the corner, its surface dim under a single overhead bulb. For a moment, I hesitated, looking away quickly, recalling each letter's warnings. Then I mustered my nerve and met my reflection's eyes. Nothing odd manifested, just my own anxious gaze. Yet for an instant, I thought I sensed the reflection watch me more intently than usual. My heart fluttered. Then it passed, and I exhaled, stepping away. That single moment, though, gave me a glimpse of the catoptrophobe's daily burden, how a fleeting anomaly could open a world of horror. And so I closed the diaries, returned them to the stack, and left with the memory of these haunted stories. Their echoes remain, a quiet reminder that illusions can be unstoppable if we let them overshadow the boundaries of reason, that behind each reflective surface might hide our worst fears, or perhaps a presence that means to do more than just observe. And in that possibility lies an unending hush, as if the mirror is waiting for its next observer to linger a bit too long in front of the glass.